at policy. All right, thanks. Then we've looked broadly at policy analysis. And now we're going to start to look at one of the products that you can use for advocacy also, which is a policy brief. Later on today, we'll look at how to create another, policy tool, which is case studies. So those are the two we will cover today. So for now, we'll look at how to write a policy brief. Great. So yeah, let's just wait for 1 more minute and then we will start. Okay, so we will start now with this our second session of the day, which is how to conduct a policy brief. And as has been the habit, which is how we conducted our first session earlier today, we will start with a simple question, which is, what is a policy brief? What is a policy brief? You can guess. Just share your understanding of what is a policy brief. It will help us to start off today's session. So I'm hoping each of us can share our own idea on what we think a policy brief is. You can go on Google. You can share, based on what you already know or think about policy briefs, and then we'll start the session. So for now, we have Alice, we have Emmanuel. What do you think a policy brief is? If you were to just guess, what would you say it is? Please go ahead, Alice.
Okay, I'm just guessing. I think policy brief, it's going to be a process whereby you're going to, whereby it is conducted in the project, the ongoing project, to assess its effectiveness.
Okay, that's that's one take, and I'll see how we can connect that to the definition. Thank you for that. Emmanuel, you wanted to say something as well. Please go ahead.
Sure. A policy brief can also be said to be a summary of information that suggests a possible policy. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, so that's interesting. Welcome, Jerry. We're currently discussing the definition of what is a policy brief. Yeah, I think they're close. They're very, very close to the definition. Emmanuel's is a bit closer than Alice's, but they are connected in some way. Let me share with you one of the or just a couple of the statements that I thought would be helpful for you to understand more about what a policy brief is. This is taken from, again, the guideline document, that we will be sharing with you. So when we talk about a policy brief, first of all, it's a summary of what you know about an issue. And it is used to help inform policymaking. So the goal of a policy brief is to advise the policymaker. And it's in terms of the packaging, it's when I say concise, I mean it's a straight to the point, it's brief, it's short, it's a standalone publication. And it informs and advises a non-academic external audience about an issue that requires policy attention. That's very important. Policy analysis is deeper, the one that we did earlier today. But a policy brief it's supposed to be for an audience that does not, maybe are not that knowledgeable on the technical elements of what you are talking about. Let's say we're discussing adolescent health. So we shouldn't be writing as though we're writing to people who already understand adolescent health in full, where if you say SRHR, they know what it means. When you say HCT, they know what it is. No. So you're writing it for an audience that might not have as much knowledge as you on the issue. So you keep it simple. And the goal is to ensure that the audience can see that this policy issue requires attention. Now, when you're trying to get people's attention, one of the things that you have to convey or communicate or to help them understand is the urgency of the problem. That this thing is important, but it is also urgent. Action has to be taken now or as soon as possible. In addition to that, you also share with them a course of action. So you give them a recommendation or recommended action that they can take to be able to address the policy issue. So a policy brief is like an impetus for action. Now that I look at the slide I've written, I realize I'm also using some technical knowledge. But when we say impetus for action, it's like a motivation. It's you're giving someone the tools to understand that this matter is important, and so we need to act on it very quickly. A policy brief is an asset to any advocate because you summarize the information, you package it in an easy to understand way, and you include a call to action that the person can respond to. So that's how we would define a policy brief. So I'm sure you can see where some of your definitions can fit in to this conceptualization of what a policy brief is. Now, when we talk of policy briefs, there are a lot of things and there's so much advice on how to write it. I thought I would focus on just a few issues. And so in the slides that follow, I will share some of the characteristics, and then I'll also describe how to write a policy brief, just some guidelines on how you can do it yourself. The same way that we provided a guideline on how to write a policy analysis document. So a policy brief should be focused. It must be specific. You must explain exactly what you are talking about. It must be focused on the issue, on the specific location, on the specific geographical audience. It's important for a policy brief to be focused. Then it must be professional and not academic. There are different audiences that you write to. There are professional audiences There are academic audiences. There are non-professional, non-academic audiences. But in this case, we are writing to a professional audience. So it's a formal document, but it's not too complicated. So it's not academic. It's not too long. You don't spend lots of pages explaining why this happened and how this happened and so forth. You cut straight to the point. You are focused. A policy brief also has to be evidence-based. Sometimes when we want to get people to act on something that matters to us, we are tempted to share information that may not be based on evidence. And sometimes you can come up with emotional arguments that are not based on fact. So it's important to make sure that whatever you are speaking about, there's an evidence base. There's research or data that backs up what you are talking about. There must be evidence that shows that your problem is urgent and it's important. There must be evidence that shows that the recommendations you are sharing can solve the problem that you are talking about. A policy brief should also be limited and succinct. Succinct again is, brief, straight to the point. It has to be focused. It's a brief, it's not an analysis. The most important point for me is a policy brief should be understandable. It should be easy for anyone who knows how to read, to just understand what you mean. It's not always that you'll write a policy brief in English. Not always. You can write a policy brief in Kiswahili. You can write a policy brief in Bemba. You can write a policy brief in the language that your audience is most likely to understand, as long as you make sure that they can all easily grasp the concepts that you are sharing. Also, a persuasive policy brief is promotional. So you are, and I'll mix the two, promotional, practical, and feasible. So it is action-oriented, and it includes material that catches the eye, that grabs attention, that makes people want to read and also makes people want to act, and then also shows them how they can act. So those are some of the characteristics of persuasive policy briefs. You can have a policy brief that's not persuasive. If it's not persuasive, it means no one is going to pay attention. If no one pays attention, no one will act. So if you want it to be persuasive, these are some of the elements that you need to incorporate. Now, this slide now looks more at the ingredients of a policy brief. If someone says, like, what is in a policy brief? These are, I would say, the five areas that a policy brief must have. And you find a lot of them are similar to a policy analysis. And they are also similar to advocacy planning. So some of these things, they keep repeating themselves. So as I mentioned to you yesterday, if you identify your problem accurately at your planning stage, you can easily bring that information into your policy analysis. You can also bring that information into your policy brief. You can bring that information into your case study. You can bring that information into your advocacy messaging. So there's so many areas where you can make use of that information if you write it well the first time. So you must, first of all, examine the issue you will be dealing with and provide enough detail on how general or specific the issue is. So this is your problem analysis. We did this when we looked at policy analysis. You also, and this is very important, you must tailor your policy brief to the needs of your target audience. In our advocacy planning yesterday, we spoke about primary and, or let me say, primary and secondary audiences. And we said the primary audience is the audience that can directly change or address the issue you're talking about. And then we said the secondary audience are the people that can influence the primary audience. So the people that can influence those that can act and solve your issue. So your policy brief must be tailored to the needs of the primary audience. And sometimes, as I mentioned yesterday, there are different primary audiences. Sometimes your primary audience might be both the Minister of Education and the Minister of Youth. So if you're writing a policy brief for the Minister of Education, tailor it to them. If it's for the Minister of Youth, tailor it to them. If you want it to be a general policy brief that touches on both, just make sure that you are writing for your audience. You're not just writing in general. One thing that you need to know is some of our policymakers are not as smart as we think they are. I know we think policymakers are these very intelligent individuals who've got all these qualifications and so forth, but politics is not necessarily about intelligence. Politics is about public support. Politics is about power and influence. And some of the people who you want to advocate to might not have the technical knowledge that you think that they have. So when you write something, write it as though you're writing to maybe someone who's 14 or 15 years old. The simpler it is, the more widely it can be understood. That's an important principle. The other thing is you need to identify the actors for your issue. So who are the people who are important in advancing the issue that you are highlighting? How is it that they can affect the issue? What power do they have over it, and what can they do to influence it? Then we also look at interests. When you've looked at all these three are related: your audience, your actors, your interests. You need to analyze the interests of the actors that you have identified. Yesterday, in the advocacy planning session, I highlighted that there's something called power analysis. And I showed you a power analysis checklist. So you use that information when you start to design your policy brief, because your power analysis will help you identify who are the influencers, what are their interests, why should they or will they care about the issue that I'm trying to articulate. And so you tailor your policy brief to be able to communicate to the audiences that you've identified. Finally, which is the most important part, you need to reflect or share recommendations that reflect an analysis of the interests of the actors that you've identified. So your recommendation may not be the best policy available, but it should be the most viable one. It's easier to write a policy brief when you've already conducted a policy analysis. It's easier to write a policy brief when you have already conducted a policy analysis, because a lot of this information will be already available to you. Jacqueline, just to flag, please do mute. Please do remember to mute. Right, so I've said your recommendations may not be the best policy, but should be the most viable one. So if you've already done your policy analysis, you can quickly recommend the right policy. I'm surprised, actually, this session is moving a bit quicker than I expected. So I'll pause for now. Do we have any questions in terms of the definitions of what a policy brief is, the characteristics of a policy brief, the components of a policy brief? Do we have any questions so far? Please do feel free to unmute your mic before we continue. Alice, Jerry, Jacqueline, any questions? Emmanuel? Any questions so far? If there are none, you can just quickly write in the chat. Okay, Jerry says no questions from me.
No questions from me as well.
Okay, Manuel, that's heard. Alice says the same, no questions. I think Jacqueline is the one with questions, no? Any questions, Jacqueline?
No question from my side, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Right, so it's important to just do a quick temperature check as we move, because sometimes it can be a lot of information to take in, like what Jerry said in the last session. That's fine. So now I will move to how to practically write a policy brief. So these are the 8 areas. Like if you're writing a document and you want to write a policy brief, these are the 8 components that make up normally a policy brief. So you have your title, you have your executive summary, you have your introduction, you have your context and importance of the problem, you have your research, results, and conclusions, you have your critique of policy options, then you have your policy recommendations and references. If you paid attention in the last module, you'll be able to see a lot of similarities between the policy analysis and the policy brief. And as I mentioned, a policy brief is like a condensed version of a policy analysis document. So when we talk of a title, we say it's important to capture the interest of the audience. So it should be an eye-catching title that communicates the content of the brief in a memorable way. So it must be clear for anyone who sees it, even from a distance, that this is what this is about. Focus on the main idea and include keywords. If you're looking at maybe it's access to contraceptives, so you need that information in the title, right? So it must be easy for people to track this document, even when they search it on Google and they want to know about the issue. You include keywords, words that will make it easy for someone to quickly find this document, even in an online search. When we talk of executive summary, which is similar, you know, if you've written project reports, activity reports, this is normally the format, you know, that you follow. So when we talk of an executive summary, this is the brief of the brief. It's the summary of the summary. So here you convince the reader that the policy brief is worth further reading. It's an overview of the relevance and the importance of the brief and includes a brief description of the problem that's meant to be addressed, as well as a statement on why the policy option needs to be changed, that's typo, as well as recommendations for action. So this is just quickly to summarize the contents of the brief itself in normally 1-2 pages. Yeah, and it's supposed to be easy for someone who doesn't have time to read the whole document to just go through the executive summary. And then we get to the introduction. The introduction sometimes may feel like a repetition of the executive summary, but the introduction is more of a preamble of the entire document. So to prepare someone to read the whole document. An executive summary is more of giving a nutshell, an overview of everything. Then if someone wants more detail, then they can go into the whole document. The introduction now says, listen, you are already reading this. This is what this is about. Here's what it will tell you. Let's go in there and let's read. They're similar, but they're somewhat different. So in the introduction, you identify the topic and you indicate your particular focus. So you clarify what you're talking about and what area of the problem you are focusing on. Make sure to engage your readers' interest. Use good language, clear language. Keep it short, keep it understandable, but keep explaining why your topic is important, because this is where you convince the person to keep wanting to read your policy brief. Explain also, what the reader will get from reading your brief. So what can they expect when they read this document? What will it explain? What tools have you used? Just an overview. What's the structure of the document, and so forth. This is where you introduce that information. After your introduction, you go into the context and the importance of the problem. This is similar again to the guidelines I provided for advocacy planning and policy analysis. Number one, convince the audience that this is an urgent problem. It needs to be addressed and requires their action. You provide a clear statement on the issue in focus and a short overview of the root causes of the problem. And you close the context section with a clear statement of the policy implications of the problem that establish the importance and the relevance of the policy issue. So when we talk about policy implications, we're saying maybe the problem is there's a lack of youth-friendly centers, and so government needs to introduce a policy where every neighborhood, every community, every ward needs at least one, youth-friendly center. So you have to explain what are the implications of this problem on policy. So the lack of these youth-friendly centers is as a result of the lack of this and that policy. If these policies are addressed, then the problem can be mitigated in these ways, and so forth and so on. That's what we mean by policy implications. Now, after that, you can share the research. So what have you found so far in your analysis of the policy, your analysis of the problem, your engagement with the communities to identify recommendations? You summarize all of that information in this section. So you provide a summary of the issues that have been identified through policy research. You move generally from general information to specific information for key results, and you tailor your findings to the target audience and the interests of the target audience. Remember, conclusions must be based on concrete results from the policy research. So remember one of the first points I made. A persuasive policy brief is evidence-based. So anything that you provide as a recommendation must be connected to the evidence of what you have found. In research, you do not draw a conclusion without connecting it to a finding, which is the findings of what you have searched for. So when we talk of findings, let's say you find that 12% of young people in Bagamoyo do not have access to youth-friendly health services. So your recommendation or conclusion is young people in Bagamoyo do not have adequate access to health services because there is a lack of health services that provide youth-friendly health services to begin with, because there is no policy that requires them to do that. So now you're connecting the dots. So everything must be connected. There must be a logical flow so that a person reading can track that, okay, you are saying this because you discovered this in your research. This is important. I do evaluations sometimes. Right now, I'm involved in an evaluation for UNFPA, which is on leaving no one behind. And one of the things that sometimes, it's very stressful is you want to make a recommendation. You know that it's a good recommendation. Let's say the recommendation is young people should be given jobs in UNFPA. But if no one said that young people should be given jobs in UNFPA during the research, then that recommendation has no basis. So in a policy brief, you don't just write your own ideas and your own recommendations. No, you reflect on recommendations that have been made from the evidence. You need to be disciplined. Otherwise, the policymakers and the people you're targeting will ask you, is this your opinion, or this is what evidence or what the people are saying is the right thing? And you cannot have a conversation with the policymaker on the basis of your opinion, because you will not have the same power as the policymaker. What gives you power is evidence. Evidence can allow you to address a policymaker at their level, because you are bringing to them what the people desire and what the people want. And that's what the policymakers are there to represent anyway. So in order for you to have power in your conversations with policymakers, make sure your arguments, your conclusions, your recommendations are based on evidence. Now, we spoke about this in the policy analysis, but I will reiterate some of these points. So you need to also critique policy options within a policy brief, though you do it within a much smaller amount of pages. You need to describe what are the limitations of the current policy options that are being implemented. So if you're looking at an issue like access to safe abortion, for example, what policies already exist? Are they doing enough? If they're not doing enough, you highlight where are the gaps, what are the shortcomings of these approaches. And then you illustrate the need for change, and you focus attention where change needs to occur. So when you've identified the gaps in the policies, the gaps could be this policy is only for people aged 18 to 24. But maybe the people who are also in need are age 15, to 19, or age 10 to 19, you never know. So maybe the gap is the age bracket that is covered by this policy. So now you illustrate the need to change, this law, so that it benefits those who have this need that is not currently being addressed. So point 3, you provide a short overview of the policy options in focus. So you look at the recommendations you are making policy-wise, and you provide a very brief overview. Just explain it quickly. And then you illustrate how and why the current proposed approach is failing. So you also need to analyze the options you are presenting. So I said you analyze the policies that are already there. You identify the gaps, and then you present your policy options that can address these gaps. And after you do that, you analyze your proposed policies and present the gaps as well. And finally, you recognize all the opinions, because you have to debate even between 2, 3 or more, policy options, so that the person who's reading can see that you have thought about the recommendations that you're making in terms of the specific policy options that are most likely to succeed. Remember, every policy has its weaknesses. Every policy has its strengths. So you should have and take time to show the strengths and the weaknesses of the different proposals that you are making, so that when you get to step 7, recommendations, you are able to provide a detailed and convincing proposal of how the failings of the current policy approach need to change, as well as a breakdown of the steps that need to be taken in order for those measures to be implemented. So you're explaining, listen, we've analyzed everything. We think this is the best option. These are the steps that you can take. to make this policy come to life. And then you include a closing paragraph that re-emphasizes the importance of action. So you've provided the solution. This is the policy. This is why the policy is important. This is the problem that the policy can address. And this is what you can do. So you provide a closing paragraph that emphasizes the importance of action. And you support the recommendations, as I said, by research findings or evidence. So when you're done with everything, for those who've done, we've had to write and provide referencing for any material you've written. You'll know that there's in-text referencing, there's post-text referencing. The advice here from the guideline documents we have is create a list of references at the end of the document so that you don't have references in the text. A person will be reading and it's easier for them to read just the text that matters and not to also have to read let's say the statement says young people in Tanzania have identified the need for access to contraceptive options, and then after that statement is written brackets Yemuranyoni and others, and then after that you continue the sentence and then you include brackets again after that with more references. It can be difficult for the person to follow. So a policy brief is a quick summary of policy options. It must be understandable. The people who read it will not have a lot of time. So make it very clean. Normally what you can do, you can put endnotes, right? If you're using a Word document and you number the references. So instead of writing a full reference after the evidence, you just have a number, like the number 1. And at the end of the document, number 1 will write the full name of the reference. Then you write, you have another reference, that's number 2. You don't write it in full there, you just put the number there on top. At the end of the document, on number 2, you write the full reference. So if anyone wants to see what you are referring to in that statement, they just follow that number to the end notes. So that's the advice on referencing. I know this session was quicker, but it was quicker because we did a lot of the early work in our policy analysis conversation. It was also quicker because we did a lot of the early work in the advocacy planning session yesterday. So it's a continuation. As I mentioned to you later today, we'll also explore how to write case studies. So I'll pause here for now. I see Cyprian is just joining in, but we are just about to close. So I'll stop sharing the screen for now and invite you to share questions. These are policy briefs. I really enjoyed the questions that were shared in the session we had earlier today. I know you're a very engaging team. You are inquisitive. You are interested in finding out more about these issues. So I'm looking forward to receiving your questions on this. Based on the information I've shared, can you say you can create a policy brief? Or do you have some questions that you still feel have not been answered? So I'm inviting you, Cyprian, Jerry, Jacqueline, Emmanuel, Alice. You've been listening in for some time. Do you have any questions, any comments on the information that has been shared so far? Okay, Jerry says my question was on referencing, but you made it clear. I think I can try and create one. Okay. I'll see if I can also find a... Emmanuel, please go ahead.
Okay, I think I just need a little bit more of time to read through in order to just get the clear understanding. But based on your facilitation, I have a clear picture of what a policy brief should look like. I think some weeks ago, we were trying to review one, and it was so confusing because it was my first time seeing a policy brief. I had learned how to formulate a policy also, but I think it was more on the academic side, of which in most cases is not really the case when it comes to the reward situation. So when we had the document, it was a little bit confusing. I would look at it and I was like, you know what, maybe you should say a policy straight and the policy brief, like I was mixing up everything. So from your sessions, I think I have a clear picture. I can now draw a line between a policy brief and a policy document itself. So yeah, it was insightful. I think I look forward to reading more of the materials in order to just have more understanding. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Manuel. I just want to show you what I was referring to in terms of the style of referencing. I'm just pulling up a document. This is from my PPF, you know. So yeah, you probably see it now. Does this have, yes, it has this tool. So this is what I meant. You see, they don't write the full reference. They don't write the full reference. They just put the number. The number is there. And then, right, turn this off. But they include it as a footnote. They include it as a footnote. So here at the end of the page, but sometimes others will put it right at the end of the entire document, which they haven't done. Oh, this is quite a lengthy document. Oof. But imagine they've referenced 116 documents, but so that it's easy to read, they haven't written the references inside the text. And Emmanuel is correct as well. Remember what I was sharing, that it shouldn't be overly technical. It's not an academic document. It's a professional document. It's meant for audiences that might not have the level of academic insights that we have. They might not have the programmatic knowledge that we have. They might not know what the acronyms we normally use mean. So keep it simple. Write it as though you're writing to the public, because you can never don't overestimate the capacity of the audience. It's always better to keep it simple so that it's accessible. Also, some of the considerations I mentioned, language. You can consider translating the documents you have. Also, in terms of accessibility, in terms of you may want to have it in like shared even through visual means with sign language interpretation. You may want to have it shared through audio for those who may not be able to see the text. So think about different access considerations. It depends on your audience. Depends on your audience, and depends on the issue also you're addressing. If you're addressing an issue of inclusion, you know, you have to make sure the language is inclusive. Language is a tool of exclusion. We use language sometimes to keep people out. The way we speak, the words we use, us and them, you know, we create these distinctions. I believe that all of us are trying to work to create a more inclusive society. So let's take extra time to simplify the documents that we are putting together, so that they can be easily accessible by a wide range of people. So we are also inclusive. You can include illustrations as well, visual cues and so forth. This is the part where I said it has to be promotional. It has to communicate through various means, graphs and so forth. I see Jerry said, I'll be joining the SRHR Alliance Kenya for policy brief regarding reproductive health for adolescents and young people during the doctor strike in Kenya. Now I know. Perfect. An encouragement to Jerry also. Let's explain the acronyms. You know, let's explain the acronyms. At least I know quite a lot because I've been in this space for a while. But yeah, I'm glad this helps. Remember, some of us as partners wrote that we want to create policy briefs. So we are expecting to read policy briefs from you based on this session and the guideline document that we will send to you. And I and the Y Plus Global team are available to support you in analyzing, editing, in helping you find more data, to connect even with other organizations that might be able to help you put that data together. So we are here for you. We're here to support you. Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions? Jacqueline, Alice, Cyprian? Any questions or comments? I just want to make sure we're together. So Cyprian, yes, please go ahead. You were unmuted at some point.
I'm sorry, I mistakenly unmuted.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
None from.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jerry. I see your feedback. This was helpful. Yeah, let's connect definitely in a couple of hours. Please do get refreshed, especially for those who've been in the morning session as well. Stay hydrated. We should be together again in about let me confirm the time. We should be together later for a session on case study development. That session will be a bit brief. It should be around 4:30 your time, which is 3:30 my time. So we'll meet later, and that'll be the last session for the day. Tomorrow we will have a session on how to create advocacy messages. Tomorrow's session, I think, will be very interesting. If you have a communications background or you want to learn how to communicate better, more effectively in your writing and in the documents that you put together, join that session. Then we have a session on how to monitor provision of youth-friendly health services on Thursday as well. So there's some tools that we've pulled together, and I'll just talk you through how to use them. And you can then use it for the work that you want to do. So with that said, I think we can end our call here. And I look forward to joining some of you later today as we go through a brief session on how to write a case study. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day until we connect later on.